Once, President Saddam Hussein was patrolling the borders of Iraq at night when he saw a settlement in the distance. Saddam Hussein said to his companions, "Let's go visit this settlement and see how the people are doing." When his companions heard this, they tried hard to dissuade him, saying it was very late and they did not know if there might be any enemy present there. Nevertheless, Saddam Hussein insisted, and they set out toward the settlement. Upon arriving, they knocked on the door of a house. A man opened the door, and seeing Saddam Hussein before him, he became astonished. He began to kiss Saddam's hands, tears of joy filling his eyes. Word spread from one house to the entire neighborhood, and then to the whole area, and soon a crowd gathered there. The people would shake hands with Saddam Hussein and sway with happiness. Saddam Hussein asked them if they were facing any difficulties, to which they replied that they were not and that they were very happy, with no troubles of any kind. Saddam Hussein then said, "All I ask is for your prayers, because as long as I stay awake, all of you can sleep peacefully. But once I am gone, you will never again sleep in peace." History bears witness that, after Saddam Hussein was gone, his words came true. While Saddam Hussein was alive, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, in fact the entire Arab region, used to sleep in peace and wake up peacefully. But later his enemies secretly conspired against him, stirred up rebellion, and, joining forces with Europe, left Saddam Hussein completely alone before his enemies. After that, America invaded Iraq, and Saddam Hussein was hanged. Following his execution, not only Iraq but Syria, Palestine, Libya, and Afghanistan also became unsafe. Today, Syria is burning, there is rebellion in Saudi Arabia, war in Yemen, oppression in Palestine. Wherever you look in the world, Muslims are facing persecution. Yet history attests that as long as Saddam Hussein was alive, there was no terrorism in the Arab world, for Saddam Hussein was a mujahid for the Arabs. The man who toppled Saddam Hussein's statue now laments with tears, saying, "I wish I had never done that. We set out to remove one Saddam, thinking he was our enemy and a tyrant, but now there are thousands of Saddams who have enslaved us. And America, which claimed to liberate us from Saddam Hussein, has bombed our country, destroyed it, committed genocide, and driven us decades behind the rest of the world." Saddam Hussein was born in the city of Tikrit, Iraq, the same city where Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi was from. Even before his birth, Saddam Hussein was left fatherless. His childhood was extremely difficult and impoverished. How he rose from such beginnings to ultimately hold the presidency of his country, and why the United States and Israel felt compelled to end his 24-year rule, are questions worth exploring. Why did he have a copy of the Quran written in his own 24 liters of blood? Let's find out certain facts about Saddam Hussein's life that you might never have heard before. So let's begin. Saddam Hussein was born on April 28, 1937. Because his father was not there to support him, his childhood was extremely difficult and poor. At the age of 12, he left his home and lived with his maternal uncle, Khairallah Talfa, who was an officer in the Iraqi army. At that time, King Faisal I, installed by the British, ruled the country. Saddam's uncle was strongly opposed to this regime and was arrested multiple times for protesting against it. Influenced by his uncle's training, Saddam Hussein also took part in these protests, and due to his young age, was sentenced to 6 months in jail for doing so. Unlike other young men who engaged in revelry or alcohol, Saddam Hussein was fond of reading books and hunting. He would save money to purchase books on history and spend time reading them. In 1958, he married his paternal cousin, and they had 3 daughters and 2 sons. At the age of 18, Saddam Hussein joined the Ba'ath political party. In 1958, a revolution finally occurred against that British-backed regime, bringing an end to the monarchy. Afterward, an even more oppressive ruler, Abd al-Karim Qasim, came to power. He had communist ideals, meaning all thinking and resources had to remain under his policies, whether the people liked it or not. He was a dictator in his mindset. Sometime later, a friend of Abd al-Karim Qasim was murdered in the city of Tikrit, and Saddam Hussein was accused of being involved. Although he was arrested, he was released due to insufficient evidence. Shortly after his release, the high command of the Ba'ath Party summoned him to Baghdad and assigned him the mission of assassinating President Abd al-Karim Qasim. For this purpose, Saddam Hussein received military training, specializing in accurate shooting with revolvers and machine guns. He and 5 of his comrades planned an attack on General Qasim. For several days, they roamed around the presidential palace, surveying routes and finalizing their plan about where to strike and which escape routes to use. On the afternoon of October 7, 1959, Saddam Hussein pointed his machine gun toward President Qasim's car and opened fire. 2 bullets hit President Qasim, but he survived. The bodyguards returned fire, killing one of Saddam's comrades and wounding Saddam himself in the leg. Fearful of being caught, Saddam could not go to a hospital. Instead, a party comrade used a razor blade to cut away the tissue around the wound and then removed the bullet with scissors, dressing it afterward. Meanwhile, the government sealed the country's borders and began raiding various places. Yet Saddam Hussein managed to escape Baghdad by disguising himself. Walking along the banks of the Tigris River, he eventually reached his hometown Tikrit. On the way, Saddam Hussein encountered a police officer. Instead of panicking, he calmly answered all the questions. When the officer asked for his ID card, Saddam replied, "We are Bedouins. We don't carry ID cards," which the officer believed. Otherwise, that could have been the last day of Saddam's life. Continuing on, Saddam came across a stretch of the Tigris River he needed to cross. It was winter, and by evening all ferry services had stopped. So Saddam Hussein removed his clothes, tied them into a bundle to carry on his head, gripped a dagger between his teeth, and jumped into the Tigris. He was injured further during the swim, but managed to make it across and finally reached his village. Saddam Hussein told his mother and stepfather all that had happened. Realizing it was no longer safe for him to remain in Iraq, they decided to send him to Syria. After all, the Ba'ath Party's main headquarters was in Syria, and he had already been invited there. In Damascus, the Ba'ath Party leader, Michel Aflaq, welcomed Saddam Hussein and sent him to Egypt to complete his education. There, Saddam Hussein finished his law degree. During that time, he also made contact with the American CIA. He frequented the American embassy in Cairo on numerous occasions. On February 25th, he was given the death penalty in Iraq. While still in Cairo, Saddam Hussein organized the Ba'ath Party. Then in February 1963, General Abdul Rahman Arif overthrew Qasim and had him killed. Saddam Hussein returned to Iraq. On September 4, 1964, the government began arresting Ba'ath Party activists for their anti-government stance, and Saddam was also arrested. Even so, while in prison, he was chosen as a member of the Ba'ath Party's pan-Arab national leadership. In 1966, after his release, he joined the top ranks of the Ba'ath Party. That same year, he and his colleagues rode into the presidential palace on tanks, overthrew the government, and installed Major General Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr as head of state. Only 2 months later, the military attempted a revolt against Ahmed Hassan, but Saddam Hussein crushed it. The Ba'ath Party devised a comprehensive plan for the country's development and started enacting policies that prioritized national interests. Thanks to Iraq's oil wealth, they brought the country into the ranks of the world's developed nations. Eventually, with a period of political stability, people's living conditions improved and their incomes grew. In the 1970s, Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, due to illness and other incidents, began to withdraw from politics. On July 16, 1979, he resigned and power was transferred to Saddam Hussein, who became the president of Iraq. In 1990, Saddam Hussein expressed an unusual wish. He wanted to have a copy of the Quran written in his own blood. For 2 years, every week, Saddam Hussein would offer his arm to a nurse so that blood could be drawn from it and used for writing the Quran. Many details surrounding this endeavor, especially about expenses, remain controversial, but repeated claims state that a total of 24 liters of Saddam Hussein's blood were used in writing 605 pages and 114 surahs of the Quran. This copy is reportedly still preserved in a mosque in Iraq. During his stay in Egypt, Saddam Hussein did not realize that the CIA, through the Ba'ath Party, only wanted to use him as a pawn to remove the existing Iraqi government. After attaining power, Saddam started working for the development of his nation and country, but when he opposed American demands, events took their expected course. The same kind of plots hatched against previous rulers were now orchestrated against Saddam himself. During Saddam Hussein's rule, Iraq engaged in the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted 8 years. Around 1.5 to 1.6 million soldiers and civilians from both countries died, and billions of dollars were lost. America devised this conspiracy, creating a rebellion that pitted Sunni and Shia Muslims against each other. Exploiting the chaos, it achieved its real objective of selling massive quantities of weapons to Iraq. It also quietly supplied arms to Iran so that both countries would keep fighting each other, destroying their militaries and infrastructure to become as weak as possible. After profiting from both countries by selling arms and depleting their resources, the United States then set its sights on Iraq's greatest asset, its oil. To get to the oil, Saddam Hussein had to be removed from power because he had nationalized the oil companies. No foreign company could extract Iraq's oil. Thus began a major conspiracy to remove Saddam Hussein. Iraq and Iran's war had barely ended, and the Iraqi people were still nursing those deep wounds. The U.S. sent its young, manipulative ambassador, April Glaspie, to meet Saddam Hussein repeatedly. She told him that a certain region in Kuwait, bordering Iraq, was constantly stealing Iraqi oil, and that if Iraq were to take military action against Kuwait, the U.S. would not object, as it was a personal matter between Iraq and Kuwait. Confident of this, Iraq invaded Kuwait and declared the small independent Arab country one of its provinces, refusing to leave. Muslim and Arab leaders pleaded with Saddam Hussein to withdraw from Kuwait, but he would not listen, prompting all the Arab states to turn against him. Seizing this opportunity, the United States convinced the Arab nations, especially Saudi Arabia, that Iraq was planning to invade them one by one, just like Kuwait. As a result, all the Arab countries gave the U.S. permission to deploy its forces, which was precisely what America wanted. The Jewish-controlled media then loudly proclaimed day and night that after occupying Kuwait, Saddam Hussein was preparing his troops to seize all Arab nations. Thus, a coalition of 30 countries' so-called army, in fact a crusader Zionist force, landed in the Arab region, unleashing a destruction the whole world witnessed. On February 28, 1991, when America commenced its military operation against Iraq, not only were 25,000 Iraqi soldiers and civilians killed and 75,000 injured, but Iraq's entire military capability was shattered. Economically, it was devastated. This was the first time Saddam Hussein was completely isolated from the rest of the Arab world, which had distanced itself from him over the Kuwait issue. The U.S. did not stop there. Through the so-called United Nations Security Council, it imposed economic sanctions on Iraq that lasted for 12 years. Whatever remained of Iraq's military might was destroyed, and the country went bankrupt. During that period, at least 1 million Iraqi children died due to malnutrition and lack of medicine. Yet even that did not satisfy America. Subsequently, the U.S. staged a massive drama of weapons inspections in Iraq that baffled the world. Once convinced that Iraq could not resist militarily, America used the pretext of 9/11 to declare that Iraq possessed numerous weapons of mass destruction, launching another invasion. Although the United Nations, several international organizations, and most countries around the world, with a few exceptions, opposed this war, President George W. Bush pressed on, motivated by a personal vendetta against Saddam, because Saddam had placed an image of the elder President Bush at the entrance of Baghdad's Al-Rashid Hotel, so that everyone stepping in or out would trample on it. In short, Bush took his revenge. This war served two American interests: looting Iraq's oil wealth and ensuring that Iraq's future military power would never threaten Israel. Thus began Iraq's devastation on March 20th, 2003. Despite huge global protests against this U.S. aggression, many countries supported America, while others remained silent. It is astonishing that the so-called Muslim or Arab rulers kept quiet or even secretly assisted the U.S. in its military actions against Iraq, a fellow Arab state without which the U.S. invasion would have been impossible. America gave free rein to Jewish agents in Iraq, annihilating the people's faith and culture and intensifying Sunni-Shia conflicts. Various ethnic and tribal groups were stoked against each other to further weaken Iraq so that it could never pose a future threat to Israel. Since Bush's so-called declaration of victory, about 600,000 Iraqis have been killed. The U.S. has unleashed a reign of terror and mass killings there, turning prisons into torture chambers and violating people's honor. On July 22, 2003, American forces attacked the city of Mosul and killed Saddam Hussein's two sons. Saddam himself had gone into hiding soon after the invasion of Baghdad, but on December 14, 2003, the American military announced his capture. On October 19, 2005, he was put on trial in prison for the alleged murder of 157 Shias. On November 5, 2006, a Baghdad court found him guilty and sentenced him to death. He appealed the sentence through his lawyers, but the court rejected the appeal and upheld the death sentence. Finally, between Friday, December 29th and the early morning of December 30th, just before dawn, Saddam Hussein was executed. It was the day of Eid al-Adha for Muslims worldwide, a time when they were all occupied with commemorating the tradition of Prophet Abraham, when they received the news that Saddam Hussein had been put to death. This was meant to be a humiliating end, a global message that anyone defying America would face the same fate. As they placed him on the gallows, they insulted him and caused him great anguish, and after his death, they desecrated his body. Only God knows Saddam Hussein's state of heart in his final moments, but by his demeanor, it appeared he had sincerely repented to his Lord. As he was taken to the gallows, he held a Quran in his right hand. Placing the noose around his neck, he handed the Quran to the executioner, instructing him to give it to a specific person. He had bathed, prayed, recited the Quran, and appeared totally calm when arriving at the gallows, a moment televised worldwide. Right before the lever was pulled from under his feet, he repeated, "Allahu Akbar" 3 times, "God is the greatest," and then fell to his death into eternal sleep. Saddam Hussein made many mistakes during his political career. He was accused of ruthlessness and terrorism, not showing the slightest mercy to his enemies. Yet no one denies his sincerity toward his nation. His gravest mistake was trusting his enemy, the same enemy that had brought him to power. When Saddam Hussein became strong enough to threaten the existence of Israel or America, or to unify Muslims, he fell for their ploy and ended up turning the entire Arab world against him. Those who might otherwise have been his strength. America broke Iraq's back and seized its resources. Even now, Iraq is like an orphan without Saddam Hussein. Destruction, unemployment, hunger, and crime are rampant. Today, everyone recalls Saddam Hussein's words with tears. "As long as I stay awake, you all can sleep peacefully. But once I'm gone, you will never again sleep in peace." Friends, it is also said that the grave in which Saddam Hussein was originally buried was later opened, and his body was removed and reburied somewhere else. To this day, nobody has been able to find out where Saddam Hussein is actually buried now. The grave currently identified as Saddam Hussein's is reportedly empty inside. But what the real truth is, only Allah knows. What do you think about all this? Please share your valuable opinion in the comments section. I'll meet you again in another interesting video. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Thanks for watching this video. Allah Hafiz.